See here. Eric is here.
Anyone else to let in, or we're okay?
I think we're okay. I'm just doing a head count right now. All right, did I see Jen Lawler?
Yeah, she's right there.
Okay. It must be me tonight.
No, it's okay. All right.
Yeah, I think everybody's here. Yeah.
All right, good. All right, so let's start. It is.
Come up yet.
I see Jen's picture, room, but I don't see Jen.
Right. And I don't see Mandy either.
Mandy's
Hi,
there.
Jen.
She's here.
Yeah.
I'm
Mandy's
here.
there.
I'm finishing
All
my
right.
dinner real fast. I'm here.
Okay. And then we have James Bond over there, otherwise known as Chuck Smith. Okay, so why don't we, I'll call this meeting to order. Tuesday, May 5th, special meeting of the Wilton Board of Education. Have members had a chance to review the agenda for the meeting?
Yes.
Yes.
Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Thanks, Glenn. Second?
Second.
Gretchen, thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay. This is time for public comments. There was an email address on the agenda. Lucille, do we have any public comments?
No, we do not have any. I don't have any in my email.
Okay, and then there'll be time at the end of the meeting as well, and we will double back and check again.
Okay.
Consent agenda, is there a motion to approve? Well, if everybody's reviewed it, is there a motion to approve it?
So moved.
Thanks,
No.
Ruth.
Second.
Thanks, Glenn. All in favor of approving the consent agenda?
Aye.
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 Any opposed? All right, that's unanimous. All right, we'll get right to it. We have our agenda item is the budget. And I think I sent you, I sent you an email earlier today outlining just the order in which we'll try to address the different topics under that big topic. And I'll just read them so the public kind of perhaps can follow along as well. We're going to start with reviewing the financial report. Then we will discuss a list of proposed encumbrances. We'll also talk about a technology lease or whether to purchase it. We'll talk about the end of year balance return to the town. We'll talk about requests to the Board of Selectmen for reserving funds for various purposes. And then we'll review and discuss the proposed flat year-to-year budget proposal, 0% increase. We'll talk about the MBR just to review it and get our kind of refresh our memories and confirm the amount. And then we'll review a scenario that involves us going as low as that MBR reduction. And then what other topics we haven't talked about related to budget, we'll do at the end. So let's go through. Anne is on the financial report. Is that you, Anne? Am I right?
Yes.
Yeah, I would.
Are there any?
But actually-
Just wonder if there are any adjustments to what we talked about last week?
Nothing to date. Nothing to date.
Okay.
So it's if anybody has specific questions on things. Actually, I'm sorry. Let me take that back. Sorry, Deborah. And Maria can correct me if I'm wrong in regards to the bus contract. I probably need to reduce the savings on the bus contract about $50,000 to $60,000 as they're working through the negotiations on that. So that would be a slight reduction to the savings of about $50,000 to $60,000.
Okay. All right. So that would bring it closer to $3,500,000.
Right.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Any other questions or comments about end of year projections at this point? Okay. We talked about, given that amount and given what we're facing next year, looking at perhaps encumbering items that are budgeted for next year, but perhaps we could purchase in this year's, out of this year's funds. And are there any changes to the recommendations that we saw last time for encumbrances? Leaving out the technology, just talking about everything but the technology.
There are no proposed changes. I would say I went back through the list and I really focused on some of the equipment purchases that were proposed. And if the board felt like we needed to reduce, that would be an area that I would go back and recommend targeting, you know, not dramatic amounts, but as I looked at some of the specific details again, we have things, you know, just across the district, like some of the, you know, athletic equipment, music equipment I flagged, you know, there's a cello in need of replacement at the high school, some culinary class equipment that was slated for replacement. So, you know, not large dollar amounts, but at least relative to the whole budget. But if we needed to pare down, we could probably pare down another $40,000 or $50,000 there. I think, and then the only other, the questions that came up were in building repairs. And so I guess this isn't really encumbrances so much as it is the reduction, but I went back and just pulled the total cost for the speaker replacement outside the bathrooms at the cider mill restrooms. That was about a $13,000 expenditure. And then there was blind replacement at cider mill. I think that was another $5,000. So we could absorb those costs into our budget with a few, you know, very minor tweaks in other places, and go ahead with those projects while still making a reduction in building repairs.
Was
Okay,
the
so-
cider mill speakers the only kind of health safety issue that was flagged, the overall kind of deferment of the maintenance budget?
Yeah, those were the two, that was a safety security recommendation. I know somebody, I think Gretchen, or maybe Ruth, it was you last week, asked a question about the heater replacements that were slated as part of the Middlebrook renovation. So we went back to Mark Esposito, who is our HVAC specialist in the district. And, you know, he said those are in, you know, good working order. And, you know, he felt strongly that he could maintain them for another year if we needed to put off that replacement.
That's good.
Any discussion, any other discussion about the proposed encumbrances? Do we feel okay about the equipment list?
So I have this whole issue with the bathrooms at Middlebrook. It's not a big deal, but I think I mentioned this to you, Debbie, earlier this week, that it's more of an optics where I have been in the ladies' bathroom where during the Wilton Children's Theater plays. So obviously it's getting a whole lot more use than it typically gets. And I think it's a teacher's bathroom that becomes the public bathroom. It leaks. And it has water that just sits right underneath both the stalls. I mean, and I remember being in there and there was somebody who had ballet slippers in the next stall, like stepping in the water. So I don't know if there's a way, I'm not asking to redo the entire bathroom, but if there's a way to correct what that leak is, and I'm guessing it happens when there's more use than not. I mean, as long as we can do that, I don't know if that has to be budgeted, or it's one of those just silly little things, but it becomes a big deal when you've got people from outside of the school system who are coming in.
Right. If you don't mind me commenting on that, first of all, I don't think it's silly. You know, all of our facilities should be, you know, in such a condition that's, you know, respectful to the people who work with them. And I don't think leaks qualify for that. So it needs to be addressed. I don't have any information. And when, you know, the idea of a leak didn't really come up when we were initially talking about the bathroom renovation. A lot of that cost was tied to bringing them up to ADA compliance. So what I would need to do is go back to Jose and ask him to explore that a little bit further, because I just don't have those details. So I don't
My
know.
guess is if you're correcting a leak, it's not going to be a huge expense. So whether it can be absorbed or, I'm not asking to have the rest of the bathrooms redone. Just correct that.
Right. Well, why don't I'll have them try to cost that out and see what the issue is.
Kevin, if I can just, Jose was looking to try and cost that out. It was about $50,000.
Just to correct the leak?
To repair, no, it was a comprehensive upgrade to that bathroom.
But
So
to
then,
correct the leak,
But I don't have it for just for the, I'm sorry, I don't have it for just for the leak. There was a more comprehensive plan.
right. But if it included the leak, then we'll assume it's less than 50.
Yep.
Okay. Do you think a fair trade-off would be going back to the equipment, Kevin, and maybe reducing equipment and adding repair the bathroom leak? That kind of thing?
I think we can start there. And then if, Jose comes back with some, cost that is, 50,000 or beyond, I would just report back to the board and we'd have to, make some other choices.
Sure. All right. All right. Would that solve it, Gretchen? If we could, assuming it's, and we all agree with you, but assuming that it's less than 50,000, maybe find it in the, shift it from the equipment encumbrance and turn it into plumbing repairs.
that would be fine.
Okay. All right. All right. Let's try that approach. What other comments are there? Okay. All right. I sort of set aside technology because the idea of an outright purchase is not budgeted for next year, but it is a potential opportunity. And there are pros and cons. And I just thought, Kevin, if you could help take us through it. I know, Anne, you set out the financial piece of it, the differences, but maybe sort of give us a bigger, Kevin, help us with a bigger context and how it would work.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think I'll give you a summary of my thinking and our collective thinking, and then I'll also ask Eric and Frank Compar to weigh in as well. So, with this proposal, we're looking to expend approximately $800,000 on tech hardware. And within that, we're looking to replace Chromebooks. We're also looking to replace about 265 teacher laptops. We're looking to purchase docking stations for those laptops and Chromebooks. We're also looking to dedicate some of those funds to replace smartboards in the classroom and then sound fields in the classroom, because we have a number of those kinds of items that are at the end of their life. And that's a schedule that we absolutely need to keep up with. So that's the what of the purchase. I think more than anything in this disrupted now emergency e-learning environment, we've come to be really reliant on our technology equipment, particularly the equipment that's used by our students and teachers. And so I think this experience just underscores the need to keep up with the replacement schedule that we had built into our tech plan several years ago. I think kind of beyond that, thinking of the global marketplace, and this is where Eric and Fran, I think, could weigh in with more details than I could at this point. But what we're learning is that other districts across the country, large districts. I think I learned about LA Unified earlier this week. Perhaps other countries are, because they're experiencing similar situations, are making large purchases. So I do think there is a sense of urgency for us around, making this decision, making these purchases now. And I guess aside from just having the educational benefit of the equipment in the hands of our kids and teachers, the added financial benefit as you're considering this is, whereas in a more traditional approach, we would have segmented that $800,000 over the course of, 4 budget cycles or so. By making the purchase up front, we are avoiding having to build in the, $200,000 or so expenditures in each of the next 3 budgets. And then we are we're avoiding having to pay. It's I think a modest interest payment, but nonetheless, we're saving a few dollars there as well. Eric or Fran, I'll turn it over to you to just add a few more details.
No, thank you,
And
Kevin.
Go ahead.
One of the things we have done over the last few years in our technology budgets is we have worked very hard with Ann to make sure that we get purchasing done in May, and at least we get in line for purchases. So equipment's arriving in July and August. Lots of districts aren't doing purchasing until June or July, and the equipment doesn't arrive till November. With the high demand for technology right now, we're seeing that the lag time is a few more months. So if we're able to get our orders in now, there's a good likelihood that the Chromebooks and laptops will arrive in late July, early August. The concern is if we wait and don't purchase until June, we will not have the technology in hand and won't have the technology for next year.
So I was actually going to say the same. There have been articles in the last couple of weeks in Education Week and other journals that basically speak to the supply chain issue, which really gives me pause. There's certainly a financial consideration here that you're all, looking at, but my concern is that without the devices in the students' hands and with a potential problem of getting them because of the fact that there are so many districts that are either just going one-to-one or doing what we did, which was in the midst of all of this, I think we've replaced about 350 Chromebooks that for whatever reason, parents, called in and said they weren't working. So we've been replacing as we've been going along. We need overages. We need the replacements of the ones that are going to actually not be in good operating order. And by the time we get back to school in the fall, we will have devices in kids' hands for 6 months at home. We really don't know what the extent of that inventory is. So without having the new devices that we could purchase, and with the fact that there are districts across the country that have the purchasing power to actually do it now. And so when we get to the supply chain and ask for our Chromebooks, we may not find them there. And then that's going to leave us in a very, very bad situation, because there's a lot of uncertainties, obviously, going into the fall. But one certainty is that we will need devices in the students' hands.
Right. And we also have built into our budget reusing the end of warranty and out of warranty devices to replace screens and motherboards and keyboards on devices that we have in that we're currently using. So it's very important that as part of the life cycle of devices, as they come off of warranty, we're able to reuse some of those non-warranted parts on some of our equipment. So it's important we have those spares, or we need to budget to actually purchase spares or additional units, new units throughout the school year. So it's really a comprehensive plan, and without those devices, it's going to be very difficult to make sure everyone has a working device in their hands when they need it.
Can I just throw in this year is different from us from a perspective of a lease. Typically, we go in front of the Board of Selectmen in advance of the town meeting to get approval to get the lease, because the Board of Ed does not have the authority to actually go into a lease. It has to go through with the authority of the Board of Selectmen. And we go in front of them, we explain, or Eric goes in front of them, explains what we need. And then once the town meeting would happen, which would be by now, we know if the budget was approved and everything's in it, the order's put in now so that we would be protected. This year, we actually don't have that timeline behind us, because the schedule right now is that the mill rate's not going to be set, technically the budget, until the beginning of June. So that puts us another month behind the deadline if we were going to try and do a lease. This year is obviously very abnormal for us. So if we went down the lease option, we would actually put another month ahead of us before we could actually buy, because until we know that budget's in place, we can't go out for that lease.
Right.
Yeah.
And it takes us somewhere in the neighborhood of 2 to 4 weeks to prep all the equipment, unbox it, and make sure it's into the domains and ready for distribution. So that's a big summer project for us. So that actually puts additional time. So even if we were able to get the devices here on August 1st. We're still pushing to get them out for the start of.
It sounds to me like it's a prudent move to go ahead and make the commitment now and to buy we have the ability to do so to ensure that we are as protected as we could be, perhaps not knowing what the fall is going to be like, but at least we're ready and we've done the right things to get ourselves in the right position from having the devices. I am not opposed at all to go ahead and making that commitment now and to move forward with it.
I had a quick question for Fran or Eric. Would it ever be a possibility, I know just using my house as an example, could you ever offer the suggestion to have like middle schoolers use their own device or a Chromebook just to save us on something like we do in the high school? I know my son uses his MacBook for everything.
Yeah,
Just
right. We did actually consider that when we actually rolled out the Ready Access digital learning plan. We have BYOD at the high school.
Yep.
We did that specifically because we wanted to have some consistency of tools and software and just like the basics of the routines that come along with getting them ready for the high school. We felt that at the high school level, they'd be much more independent and be able to use all of those tools. We do have much more control. We've put in a filter through iBoss to all the district-owned devices. That has offered us the ability to be compliant with SIPA rules. So there's a lot of underlying reasons why it led us to middle school being still district-owned while we go to the high school. We want to release that and begin giving them independence. The age, of course, for SIPA is 13 and under.
Right. I just didn't know a cost saving is if we could ever send out a survey and just give people the option, which would free up a ton. I know Chromebooks don't get used in my house, rarely. So just a thought. And then my other question was, and sorry, I didn't even give you a chance to answer that. My other question was, you know, on a teaching and learning commission committee meeting we had today, we discussed the possible need for increasing our infrastructure of the wireless in some of our I just want to make sure that if we have X amount of money, this is really the best utilization of our money. And what you're saying all makes sense. But if we have to then spend, you know, a couple $100,000 to increase our wireless infrastructure, what's the priority?
Yeah, so let me just give some context for Eric, who would be the person best able to answer the question. Eric, earlier today when we had the Teaching and Learning Committee meeting, we were trying to just talk through some at a very high level, some of the considerations for next fall. And one of the possible scenarios could be situations where we have, you know, partial classes returning to participate in live instruction and, you know, another part of the class working at home. So I imagine that, you know, we could have a much more significant demand on our Wi-Fi if we had, you know, hundreds and hundreds of people accessing the Wi-Fi at the same time. So I just, so my question was, you know, is our infrastructure robust enough?
So our infrastructure, if that was the new model, we would need to possibly enhance our internet connection. And we can fairly easily double the speed of our internet connection. I can get a price for that, Kevin, and report back to the board on that cost. But it's something that we have the equipment in place to allow for us to support additional internet bandwidth, to support at home and users on campus. But our Wi-Fi on campus should be more than adequate to support the demand. We just may have to get a more robust internet connection to allow those that are remote to connect in. So I can get pricing for that and report back to you and the board.
Great.
Okay, that would be helpful because as you look at possible scenarios for, you know, what next year would look like, you know, including some sort of hybrid between on-site and online. You know, wondering what the building connection could be to the homes, and that brought up the infrastructure question. So it would be helpful to get a price for that. Okay, all right. So thinking about that, but also thinking about the lease. Any more comments about the lease?
So I just have a question. So the purchase allows you to put in the order now, and you get in the queue. and then you have the devices in hand, hopefully like August, September. So a month from now, we do a lease contract and we get in the lease queue, and then maybe the devices come in, let's say November, September, October. Are you saying that the lease, there might be a supply issue with leases because we'll get bumped in the queue from people who outright purchase? Like, I'm just trying to, kind of figure out the numbers.
So I think we're actually proposing here, to not lease, right? Just to purchase all of the equipment outright up front, have it shipped to our doorstep.
Right.
The lease process, I think Ann can kind of talk us through the steps, but with the lease process, we go through a formal process where the board votes to, recommend a lease purchase to the Board of Selectmen. And then at some point in the future, the Board of Selectmen votes to, adopt the lease, and then it goes from there.
If I hear Ruth correctly, you're wondering, Ruth, by going down a lease, is that putting us off because of the lease, the way the payments? It doesn't, once we're locked into a lease, our payments and our schedule is set up quarterly. So it doesn't matter that we're now paying quarterly. Eric can go and start purchasing it. It just means that it's paid from a leasing company, whoever the company is.
No, I was just curious if the supply concern was just was it, just the longer timeline and being able to lock in the actual supply.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
just like that month and a half, that 2 months, like that's the concern. But if we went down the lease, road, once we got locked in, like you're locked in. It's just whether, like, how many people come before you within the next month and a half, 2 months. Is that what just so I understand?
Yes. Ruth, I think our concern is if we wait until June or mid-June to order, we may not get the equipment till November or December. I think that's our concern.
Right.
So if we can order now, we believe we can still get product in early August, late July, which will allow us to have equipment for the start of school, which is our goal.
And can I just ask you, are we like on a rotating schedule? So is it like come September, if our order is not in yet, how many devices actually become unusable or are off limits or offline?
Right now, our equipment, our 5th grade units go offline and our 8th grade units go offline, and we need to replace our 1st grade units, and there's about 150 high school units that will go offline. And then we're end of life for both Cider Mill and Miller Driscoll on the teachers' equipment. So they're all in, we have a 4-year replacement cycle for the teacher laptops. We have a 3-year replacement cycle for all of the Chromebooks. So we're end of life on about a third of our Chromebook fleet. We're end of life on about 50% of our teacher laptops, approximately.
Yeah, that's what I was kind of that's what I was trying to game out a bit. Just where would we be in terms of like, if September comes and we don't have them, where would we be in terms of having adequate usage?
Right. We'll have equipment, but it will be end of life equipment, and the reliability is dramatically reduced.
Okay.
And if we're buying it instead of leasing it, is there any difference as far as the return of unusable equipment or end of life equipment? I guess I'm just trying to figure out, like, sometimes when you lease something, you're able to return it and get something new. Rather, if you buy it, you're kind of stuck with it. Is that the case here?
The leased equipment we keep and recycle for parts.
The leasing is a financial mechanism. It's just more financial. It's not leasing the equipment from the vendor. It's just the lease is a financial mechanism to purchase it versus leasing like you would a car from a dealership.
It's not a car.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. All right. So we need to get any more questions out now, because Thursday night, as we vote on a lot of different budget related issues, this will be one of them. So are there any other questions or comments to help us make the decision on Thursday? All right, I must admit that my thinking has certainly evolved on this or changed. I think as soon as you say supply chain, I just sort of start to get nervous. But Mandy's question is a good one about maybe there are even more critical things that we need in technology. So let's look at both of those if we can by Thursday. So that's a help.
I did want to just add one comment personally.
Yeah.
That my daughter was having issues with her Google Chromebook, which had nothing to do with the book itself. But she had been using my Apple computer. The Apple does not work with the Chrome, with all of the Chrome devices that are there. It's a little bit different. So I found that to be a little interesting, just in case people needed to know that. The view is a little bit different, and when they're on Zoom or something and she's using my computer, she wasn't able to access what she needed to. So anyhow.
Okay.
I just one question. The number though is still 578, correct?
The total it's 800,000, and so the way I have 578 because I carved out both the 222 that was listed. That was the original amount in the original budget.
Okay.
So so that's an encumbrance, and then it's an additional 578 encumbrance for a total of 800,000.
Okay.
Yeah. So if you just look at the lease itself, it's 800, but we've already budgeted 222, is it?
Correct.
For next year, and we've drawn that into the sort of the more traditional encumbrances because those are things we'd already budgeted. And the question is, do we want to add the rest of the amount? So that brings us to our next topic, which is, Anne, can you give us like our sort of projected year end, with just the encumbrances budgeted and then the lease? What's the difference?
It's about 1.6 million. Net. That's what between the 3 million, take out the lease of 8 and 600,000.
No. If let's say we just stuck with the encumbrances and forgot the tech lease.
Oh, it would be $2.4 million if we did the encumbrance left.
All right, and then if we added the tech purchase, that would bring it down to 1.8.
1.6.
1.6.
1.6.
Right. Yeah.
But then we're double counting the 222, aren't we?
I have it at 1.8 because what I'm looking at is that you have the 222, which is included in the total $600,000 worth of encumbrances, and then you add 578.
Oh, I didn't realize. Sorry, my fault. Total. I didn't realize.
Yeah, let me share my screen. You can, if my math is wrong, you can correct me, but I think I have it.
So it was the tech lease is split up into two pieces.
Right.
The 576 and the 222. Yep.
Right.
Yeah. My apologies.
Now it's confusing, but I did that, intentionally just so we could manage what was in the budget and what was.
That makes sense. Right.
Yeah. So can you see my screen? Did I share it? I never remember to press the share button. All right. So we have the 599,822 that we're proposing to encumber. That includes the 222, which would have been the first payment in the tech lease. The remainder of the tech lease amount is 578, which brings the total encumbrances to 1.17.
Right. Yeah.
Right. So the 1.8.
And that leaves of that 3 million, that leaves 1.82. That's unexpended from the remainder of this year's budget.
Got it. Okay.
Yep.
All right. And so, so if we do everything, including the tech, that would bring us to 1.8 million.
Yeah.
And if for some reason we decided not to do the tech lease, then we've encumbered we've encumbered 600,000, and that would leave 2.4. So that, in my way of thinking, that either one of those numbers, 2.4 or 1.8, depending on where we land on purchasing the technology, that's the money to be returned to the town. Except we want to reserve some of that return to the town.
Right.
So now let's look at that reserve, those reserve funds. And we had talked last time in terms of a special ed reserve for compensatory education because of COVID, and then other COVID related expenses. And then we'd also talked a lot last time because Andrea helped update us to make us more aware of the possible legal expenses for next year. So let's start talking about if we ask to the Board of Selectmen to reserve in what I would suggest are at least 3 areas, the special ed, and then I would put legal separate from that, and then COVID-19. We had originally said 350 for SPED, 350 for COVID. We talked about legal. Glenn and others had argued we really should up the special ed total, whether that was legal or not. So can we just kind of have a discussion about, Kevin, where you are with recommending those numbers and where you think, and have the board members figure out where they think we should be going?
Right. You know, just to try to apply some logic, Ann and I went back and looked at the spend on SPED legal from a year ago, and that number was about 169,000. So if we, had, what's existing in our budget and then proposed to reserve an additional 169 in case we had, extraordinary SPED settlement expenses or what have you, I think that would be the beginning point of what I would propose.
Okay, and then leave the 350 in special ed and 350 for COVID?
Correct. So you have 350, 350, 169, which is a total reservation request of 869,000.
Okay. All right. So questions, comments?
No, I think that makes sense. And if you look at the letter that came from Ross today, Tartell, he's in agreement that we need to move the special ed reserve to the $500,000 level, which I recommended on our last meeting. And I'd rather be prudent in doing that than getting caught at the end by surprise and having not have enough in the reserve. And if we don't need it, that's great. And if we do, we're covered and we're protected. So I don't think there would be any problem at all going to the Board of Ed going to the Board of Selectmen looking to establish that level of reserve that we think is a prudent position. Hopefully we'll never need it. And that would be wonderful.
Okay.
I have a question. If we're doing a separate legal reserve for 169, do we need to increase our SPED from 350 to 500? I think part of our concern last week was if we left it at 350 and that took care of helping our students plus helping any legal costs, that we were kind of pulling from the same pot. But if we're making a separate reserve, do we also have to increase our SPED reserve?
No, I think the proposal was to leave it at 350 and separate 169 for legal. Was that your question, Jen?
That's what I was thinking. I was wondering if Glenn was thinking to increase SPED to 500, leave the 350 for COVID, and the additional 169 for legal.
Oh, up it. Oh, okay.
That's what I was wondering, if that's what he meant, or if he just meant leaving.
Yeah.
What you proposed.
No, my move would be to take the whole special ed to 500, which would include whatever additional reserve we might need for legal. Not 169, but added 150 to what we had already proposed to get us to 500.
In addition to the legal?
Well, that would include whatever legal, the 350 originally proposed, and then 150 for what may happen. And if it doesn't, great, and we'd give it back to the town. But at least we've got the reserve there in the event that we should need it. So I met a 500 level. for special ed in total, whatever their needs are, including legal, et cetera, et cetera.
Okay.
Okay.
I agree with the 350 and the 169. So
Which is,
whatever that adds up to, which is a little bit more than 30.
yeah, well, I guess it's still what, 519,
Well.
whatever. Yeah.
Okay. Somebody referenced, Glenn, I think it was you, the letter that the Board of Ed saw from Ross Tartell. So just remember that he's speaking as a private citizen there rather than for the Board of Selectmen. I know they haven't discussed it yet. So that is what it is.
No, and I understand that. You're absolutely right. But
Okay.
eventually we're going to need to get to them and have them, work on this and approve it. So that's my only reference.
Yeah, sure. No, I understand. No, we did get a letter from Ross,
Yeah.
but again, speaking as a private citizen
Which
at
is
that
a very good letter. It has a couple of issues that we need to talk about tonight relative to our budget in it.
Okay.
So I guess my question is just on the 350 side of it. I'm just concerned as to whether or not it's going to be enough. Are we running, or do we not even know what type of summer program? So is it even like are kids going to be coming in with even an additional lag than what was previously anticipated? And so I'm just trying to think about just the broader picture of what the return to school will be like, and the services that are going to be required, just I think across the board, up and down to all students, and then perhaps some students meeting them where they're at is even, if they're, depending on what type of summer we're able to provide, might even be, different than what we originally had in mind.
Yeah, Ruth, I think, you're hitting on the kind of the $1 million question. And as Andrea, spoke to last Thursday, there's far more that we don't know than we do know. What we can say is that, our teachers our special educators in particular, working through presence learning, are doing a remarkable job in reaching out, connecting with kids, supporting their education, moving them along. But until we actually have them back in front of us, it's hard to generalize and say what our costs will be. And so I invite Andrea to weigh in again, but
I'm just in general, my general just operating thought is just trying to keep us as liquid and accessible to funds as possible, in the case of, I'm not trying to like tilt at windmills or be, but I just, I'm living it at home as, my husband is planning going back to work. He's in charge of it for his company, and just the scenarios are, and the possibilities are just be to some extent overwhelming. And I just want to make sure that we're just, preserving all our options.
Well, Mandy can speak to this. I think she sort of put it perfectly, but Kevin started going through, and we'll be hearing some of this on Thursday, what some of the possibilities or the concepts that we're going to have to wrestle with, and Mandy said, well, maybe we should just stop the meeting. And I think she said some other things too, but, just give us a time to breathe. So I guess my takeaway is we can't possibly even put in enough money if all those things were to happen. Right. So we have to pick an amount that looks reasonable as a start. If all of that came to be, then very few school systems would be able to operate. And then remember, we do have the ability to go to the town, even if we run through the reserve for, heaven forbid we do that. But you know, in a way, it's so much money that you just have to sort of put a placeholder in and think, okay, this is what I can kind of wrap my head around and we can kind of see. But if all those scenarios were to happen that people are talking about, there's no system in the world that could afford all that.
I agree. I just, we're never going to come to an amount that's going to be enough.
I just wanted to just better kind of understand like our stake, you know, like our placeholder a bit, you know, especially because we are talking about a budget that was even as proposed under normal times, not requiring an increased mill rate. You know, if we're going to ask for a reserve that then would be returned to the town if not used for a specific purpose, if we should just be a little bit more conservative in our with, you know, in our ask.
Okay. Got it. Anyone else want to weigh in? Gretchen or Jen?
Well, I actually am comfortable with that number, because any number that's not spent, I understand will go back to the town, correct?
Well, it's already going back to the town. We're just asking them to, you know, earmark it for some particular costs.
It's kind
But
of just
if we don't-
a matter of when it would actually go back to
If it's not spent, it's not
Right.
allocated to us.
Right.
So that's why I'm comfortable with the 350 and the 169.
I think I would go back to Andrea. I mean, if we separate legal costs and leave 350 for you guys to do what you need to do, is that a better number? Like, what does
Better
that
than
get
zero.
you?
I think, you know, it gives us, you know, it does give some wiggle room to, for us to be able to know that, you know, the PPT, the team that works for a child is, needs to do what's right for the child and consider costs after. That's their task. That's what they're charged to do under federal law. And so we do that. Doing that has impact on the rest of the larger picture of the budget, as you all well know, year to year. This just adds a whole nother layer of potential. So I think knowing that there are $350,000 there to be able to, as we assess the impact of this on individual students, to be able to make those decisions, knowing we won't be negatively impacting anything else in the budget, gives me, you know, will help me to, you know, at least help the teams make those decisions. I think it's better than zero, and I agree with what everyone said. I think you could put $1 million, you could put $2 million, you could put $5 million. We have no idea. So right now, I think 350 is the way to go. I like the suggestion to separate out the legal costs. I like the estimate based on doubling the legal costs that we would typically spend in a year. In the event that there are legal issues related to COVID, I think that makes very much sense, and I would support, I would ask that the board support that going forward, and we will just have to keep our eye on it and report back to the board as we see this unfold when we finally do get back to school and are able to assess the impact.
Andrea, maybe it would help to give some examples of what we could possibly see the money being used for.
Okay. Well, in its simplest form, it might be for direct service to students. So we'll be paying service providers to provide direct service to students, services that they were not able to benefit from during this period of closure. There might be opportunities for providing evaluations, deeper evaluations to assess impact. I would see that there may be a significant number of new referrals to special education as a result of this, for students who may be experiencing social and emotional issues related to the trauma. So I would expect that we'll see a fair number of new referrals, new evaluations, and an uptick in the number of students requiring special education service. I would expect we'll be doing some in-home services for students who are either medically fragile themselves or have family members who are medically fragile. So I'd expect that we'll be doing some in-home services or supports for some of our kids. And some of our kids are going to be fine and have really done well in this environment. So it's not an all or nothing. And I think the state is going to need to give guidance on what is the metric. How do we make the decision about what a free and appropriate public education is during a time of historic closure? Because it's not measured against the same metric that we would usually use, so the typical metric, because things aren't typical. So and whenever there are that many question marks in special education, things get determined in the courts. So that's where due process hearings and legal fees and those kinds of things start to play a role, because when there are this many question marks, it's the courts that have to make decisions. Does that help?
Yeah, guys, the bottom line is we don't have a clue what the impact may be on our special ed, group of students. We really don't. And if we have the opportunity to create a reserve that might help us get through this with minimal financial impact, knowing where we're going to end this year, I think we need to try and take advantage of it. Yeah, because we really don't. I mean, who knows what the future holds for these children? And
Glenn, I'll actually interrupt you to say, who knows what the future holds for any of our children?
No, exactly. You are exactly right. We have no idea what's going to happen when we try and get back to school in the fall, what the requirements are, what the regulations are going to be, how we're going to do it. We're really kind of in the dark totally. In so many ways, are we going to have half students one day and the other half students the next day? We just don't know, and no one does. And I think our budget reality has to be that, all right, we're not going to spend any more than we did last year. And if push comes to shove, we will try and get down to our minimum budget requirement. But I don't think that's going to be sufficient in any way, shape, or form. We're going to have costs that we do not anticipate or could anticipate. It's just going to be, we're really going into this totally, completely blind, in my opinion.
Right. Well, what we've tried to do, I think,
Yeah.
the original 350 for compensatory ed and special ed, that number was based on what is our extended school year program typically cost, and we could imagine needing to at least double that. So there's a need that we're sort of doubling that compensatory piece. So there's a logic there. There's some logic to the legal fees in that we look at what a year costs normally, and we say, well, if the sky falls, maybe it'll cost twice that. So we're asking to reserve that. And then the last piece, that is absolutely we got to put something in, and we can probably never put enough in. And I'm sorry, my phone's ringing, and my husband's not here to take it off, so I'm sorry. So I'll just be quiet. Anything else on this reserve fund kind of things?
No.
Okay. Thanks. All right, so that brings us, in terms of our order, to talking about, all right, let's go back to the flat scenario that was talked about last Thursday and ask Kevin if he made any adjustments or, what your thinking is. I think we've answered the questions about what about the health and safety and construction related things, but if it ties in again, go ahead.
Yeah, no, the other than what I raised already in terms of some of those adjustments, speakers at Cider Mill, et cetera, we've made no other adjustments at this point.
Okay.
Can I just ask a quick question? When you have listed under equipment,
Yep.
and then there's the line item for equipment, and it's 200,000,
Right.
and then underneath it, it's equipment repair and maintenance, 10,000.
Yeah.
So under the equipment part, is that like athletic equipment, building equipment? Like what equipment is?
Yeah, it's all of the above, Ruth. It's a broad bucket category. So,
Okay.
you know, classroom equipment, science scales and balances, athletic equipment, replacement helmets, things like that, maintenance equipment. So I think there was a floor scrubber proposed to be replaced on one of the lines. So it's a very kind of long list spread across many sub-accounts.
Okay.
Okay. And all right, so are there any questions or comments about the strategy to get to flat, which in essence is to encumber some money, encumber around 600,000 of stuff that was already budgeted in the request. Take that and do that now. And then a large chunk is from deferring Middlebrook. And then the rest you can see listed in the various accounts. So that would get us to a 0% increase, a flat year to year. So if there are any questions or comments, let's have them now, because the next thing we need to do is talk about the other scenario that we haven't yet seen. Okay, all right, so we know what flat looks like. Can we talk a little bit, just refresh our memories about the MBR number?
Sure.
We did get a question about whether that's the accurate one, and could you just kind of refresh us about how you checked it out and how you came to that number?
Yeah, absolutely. And so, you know, Ann can weigh in here. So Ann spoke to Kevin Chambers up at the State Department and got the preliminary MBR number. That worksheet we provided in the document we shared with you last week. We got a question because the law is written fuzzy. So one of the questions we received was, is an MBR, you know, they're looking specifically at the provision around examining enrollment over a period of 5 years. In the law, allows you to look back over 5 years. So the interpretation from the person who emailed us was, you know, can't you aggregate all of the enrollment decline and total that number in the MBR formula, which would be closer to $4 million, as opposed to looking at any single year enrollment decline. So I pushed that question onto Jessica Smith, our attorney, and she and her colleagues at Shipman, I think, have been dealing with this question from a number of districts across the state. And she came back and reported that, no, despite the way the language might be described, it's really intended as a single year reduction in enrollment. So that being said, looking at the worksheet provided by the state, the total MBR reduction was, where I lost it, Frank. What was it? Like 1.14 million.
193.
Correct. Yeah. So, you know, I'll probe that a little bit more in the next day or so, just to absolutely be, you know, 100% certain that, you know, that's the number. But as of right now, I feel confident that that's the MBR number. So I'll share my screen again, and then we can, Ann and I can just talk through, you know, and what I guess what I would say is, you know, this is a pathway to MBR. This doesn't necessarily constitute, and well, let me just be very clear. This is not my recommendation of how we'd get to MBR. You know, if push came to shove and we needed to back our budget down, well, I think, you know, some of these categorical reductions would stand. I would work with all of the administrators on this call, as well as our principals, to go back and do some more refinement. And you'll see right away, to get to MBR, we're looking now not just at non-personnel reductions as we did with the move to reduce our budget to flat, but now we're also looking at personnel reductions. And the personnel reductions here is a total of total reduction of 971,881 additional to get to MBR. That's on the salary line. That's the equivalent of 5.5 certified staff. And then we've also we've increased the reduction to substitutes and temporary help. We've reduced overtime. So that when looking at the overtime, you know, we're anticipating we're going to need our custodians. So, and we would go, and we often provide clerical overtime for some of our 10-month clerical staff to do work in the summer. So there are a number of other areas that we would target for reduction in overtime and try to avoid any custodial impact to the custodial overtime budget. And then you can see as you look down through the non-personnel reductions, we would go back into the building repair count and further reduce that. Same with the equipment and repair line. And then we'd further reduce operating and general supplies, followed by some further reductions in technology, textbook, workbooks. And then we would completely eliminate the funds we had proposed in this budget to replace library books. And would you, anything you want to add or clarify?
No, you've covered everything that we were looking at. We really tried to keep, you know, building repairs went down again, but we tried to keep with Jose going through what could he work with in making sure we got most of the critical things that he would need outside of what we just discussed with the bathroom. And then the other areas are with our textbooks, workbooks, they were the other areas that we could touch without going back to personnel more.
Right. And with the potential staffing reductions, it would be my desire to avoid layoffs. So I think my first approach would be to look at vacant positions and try to manage that level of reduction through attrition.
So that means that the effect on programs. Well, go ahead, Glenn.
Yeah, Kevin, what is the E-rate?
Yeah, that was my question.
Yeah, go ahead, Andy. You want to just take that?
Yeah, we get from spending, and correct me if I'm wrong, Eric, we get to spend on different technology, different needs that we have, and we get what's called an E-rate reimbursement on those expenditures. So it's kind of like a holding account that we would spend up to a certain amount of money, we get a reimbursement for it, and then that gives us spending capacity for more technology-based stuff. The reason we eliminated the 41,000 here that was there, that's shown, is because we got some E-rate money back, which will cover this for us. So we can spend that E-rate money out without affecting the current spend that we need for technology supplies.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
It makes us ineligible though for future E-rate reimbursement because now we're not spending anything.
Okay.
Yep.
But Kevin, I have a question. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
By not rehiring vacancies, does that increase your student to teacher ratio?
It depends on the area. It's, you know, Mandy, I'm really trying to avoid specifics because, you know, we have so many people who are fragile, but I think certainly the potential is there. You know, I think as we set up some guiding principles, we would work hard to, you know, protect students, protect class sizes, protect, you know, staffing as well. But I couldn't say, you know, for certain that there wouldn't be a potential impact.
In your original, when you first sent this out, we talked about attrition. What is the reality of attrition helping us get to this number?
Well, it depends. I mean, we have some retirements. We have some resignations. You saw those on the consent agenda when last we met. Some of them, there's a resignation at Middlebrook that, that's not a position we could leave vacant. In that team structure today, it doesn't make any sense. So that wouldn't apply here. But we have, there's a retirement at the high school that we could look at in the world language department. And if that was one that we wanted to leave vacant, then that would certainly impact classes there. We also have some proposed new hires, in special education. And so we'd have to go back and talk about what's the cost benefit. We going through this budget process, Andrea and her team, put together, I thought, a very compelling case for continuing to support our special education program. Their work is paying dividends. So a lot of very good thinking in terms of targeting additional FTE in that department. You may recall too, we also had proposed hiring an elementary SPED teacher and then eliminating 2 para positions. So that's another one that we'd have to reevaluate. So we're still losing the 2 paras, but then we have to just do the cost benefit of, are we going to jeopardize ourselves and our work if we don't hire that SPED teacher? So there are a number of places to go.
Yeah. And the stipend reduction comes from?
Right. So there, we have stipends for a variety of reasons all across the district. So a number of the stipends support teachers who provide time developing and supporting clubs and activities. We also have instructional leader stipends all over the district. So I think, we'd have to look at the total magnitude of stipends, and then I suspect what I would propose if we had to make that cut would be we reduce certain stipends. So we don't necessarily eliminate any, but we reduce the the amount of time that we would ask teachers to commit to that work.
Okay. Thank you.
I think one of my concerns also is the cutting of substitute help, because I can envision that being a greater need next year than in previous years.
Yeah.
As teachers are dealing with their own unfortunate sickness or family sickness. I'm concerned about that.
Yeah, I think
Kevin,
that's
can I take-
a reasonable concern. Go ahead.
Ruth, if I can address that, part of that is with our substitutes, we have different types of substitutes, and we get some from the local colleges. So you would protect the substitutes that would be covering for the teachers to make sure that we keep those substitutes in place. And obviously we reduce substitutes because we reduce training and conferences because they go hand in hand.
Okay.
So there was a reduction there, but the further reduction would be that we'd still try to keep the substitute that would cover for the teachers versus the substitute cost that comes from the local colleges that schools take in for substitutes or interns.
Right. So we take on interns and student teachers. So we would just forego that. Okay.
Okay.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Okay.
Got it. I can't see everybody, but I don't know if Jen or Mandy.
I'll take my screen down.
Yeah. Jen or Mandy, any comments or questions?
Not right now, because everybody
Okay.
else is pretty much, and we kind of talked about this earlier, via email and whatnot.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree.
Well, I think that, as soon as you start talking about staffing reductions, our kids are going to come back in whatever form, wherever they are and wherever our faculty ends up is, we're going to be depending on them more than ever. And then our kids are going to come back with increased needs. So to play with to think about reducing staffing levels when we're going to need our faculty more than ever, it's just is an important thought to me. We're talking about in some way, shape, or form, either increasing class sizes, perhaps not everywhere, but in some areas it could happen, or we're going to shrink our programs and our support. And our kids need more support than ever. So just to look at Andrea's model of if you remember our budget conversations about using paraprofessionals with our special needs students, has worked in some ways and in many ways been very beneficial. But what's more beneficial would having a certified person with them. So to have to push that off, in an era where already our achievement gap between general education and special education is bigger than we'd like. And then all our kids are going to come back needier than ever, not only special needs kids. To play with our staffing levels and our ratios, I just think it would be horrible to do that in the middle of anytime, but certainly in the middle of a crisis, because learning has already suffered this year. So we can't take our most precious tool and say, well, we don't need as much of it. So I just hope we don't have this conversation seriously. I hope it will be a scenario that's considered and rejected.
And to further your point, Deb, it's even more, it's going to be a programmatic cuts, because we're going to come into regulatory hurdles over class size.
Mm-hmm.
So increasing class size in the current climate of social distancing requirements is something that is not even, I think, going to be something that's going to be permissible or manageable. So
Right.
the trade-off, I don't even think is going to be available.
Right. Or you just think about, our challenges with math and trying all sorts of strategies to, through staff development, of course, but also through some of the extra intervention supports for all our kids and the AIM program at Middlebrook. So if we have to go back and either enlarge those programs or reduce those programs, when kids are going to come back, with a bigger lag than just summer lag next year is also not the right thing to do. So we can't disenfranchise our kids' learning to that extent by playing with staffing levels. And I think those of us on the business ops committee and actually during budget, Kevin tries to emphasize that when you look at our number of counselors or class sizes or teachers or administrators or curriculum coordinators or whatever it is, our ratios in terms of staff to students are always higher than our other counterpart DERG towns. So to take that and make it, further imbalanced between the rest of our neighbors and also, more importantly, our needs just doesn't make any sense. So, I mean, I'm on a soapbox and I think I'm sort of probably, overdone it, but I just think this horrible to have to look at staffing reductions when again, they're our greatest tool to help us get through this.
Yeah, but Deborah, you're not alone, okay? We don't have a clue yet of what coming back in the fall is going to be like.
Absolutely right.
What the regulations are, what the requirements are going to be, what the direction is going to be from the state. And I truly think that we need to go forward with a flat budget, no changes from that. That I think we can reasonably accomplish with the spending, with the investments from what our reserve request is which should be to the town, and then try and figure out, because we are really we're shooting blind here. We just don't have an idea what coming back to school in the fall is going to be like, and to try and presume or assume what it's going to be like, we don't know. We just do not know. And yeah, with some draconian measures, we could get to an MBR if we needed to, but I certainly would not put that forward as an option at this point. I think the discussion we've had about pre-spending covering or doing whatever we need to do with the money that we have available to us as a result of this year's performance is a prudent thing to do, and that helps us get stay one step ahead, perhaps, maybe not enough, but we just don't know. And until we find out, until we learn what the state's going to require, what the state's mandates are going to be, we're just shooting blind here. We really are. So I think our presentation to the Board of Finance should be, yes, we can accomplish a flat budget, do some of the things that we think are prudent to do in terms of pre-spending, the buying versus leasing, et cetera, and then we're going to be just in the dark, and we're going to be playing it, learn as you go from here on out.
Right. Other comments? Well, I want to thank Kevin and the principals and Anne, Fran, Eric, for all the thought that's gone into these, sort of planning the different scenarios. We will Thursday need to vote to approve our best recommendation. And again, none of this is desirable, but this is a COVID world. So we'll look at Thursday, voting on several different things. Again, just give us a little bit more time to think, but I think we need to accept the financial report. We need to vote to approve the proposed encumbrances. We need to decide on the technology lease. We need to decide on the amounts to ask the town to reserve for us for those various purposes. And then we need to vote on a recommended budget that Kevin will bring forward. And I assume, Kevin, it will be flat. And then, of course, we just need to acknowledge that we will be submitting the NBR scenario to the town. To the Board of Finance. So that's the process as I get it. Did I leave anything out, Kevin?
No, I just want to add one point. I did speak with Jeff Rudeschauser earlier this afternoon, and he asked that we do look at the scenarios beyond MBR that they had requested to help them just understand the magnitude of the disruption of services. And so I'll give that some further work. I'll defer to all of you if you want to discuss those scenarios. But, I think if we're at MBR, we're looking at reducing, the equivalent of 5 certified staff. When you get to, 2%, that number increases, 5%, that number, more than doubles, 10%, that number more than doubles. So I think it's fair to say that we would be dramatically changing the way we do business if we had to, entertain budget scenarios at each of those different levels.
Yeah.
Okay.
Kevin, quick question, and Anne, going back to Ross's letter, and I think as a perhaps a signal or a presentation to the town, the reduction of participation fees and club fees. What would the dollar impact of that be? I have no idea how much is there. And is there a way that perhaps we could, for this coming year, suspend those fees for the parents without any major impact, and could recover that in some way? Is a question.
Glenn, the process that we have in place, if parents come forward and express a hardship,
I understand. Yeah.
So,
right.
I guess I want to be careful about making those wholesale decisions, because I think while certainly some or many would benefit from that, not everybody would necessarily need that. So rather than just make that change and then have to go find the money elsewhere, I would prefer to deal case by case.
Okay. All right. Fair enough. I just thought it would be, as Ross said, an indication to the community that we understand where things are, and that it would be that we could perhaps for a year, suspend those, not do away with them forever, but at least for the coming year, make a gesture that would be acceptable or would be of benefit to the community. That's all. Okay.
And if we're sharing proposals that drop us even lower, down to the 2% or greater than that, putting us below the MBR, my understanding from last meeting was that we would lose a significant amount of money coming in.
Yes.
The ECS funding would be put in jeopardy if you cut your budget below MBR, correct?
And wasn't there also, like, I know Andrew was just randomly guessing, but like a 1 or 2 million from the
The
special
maintenance
ed?
of, so that's, she was speaking to the maintenance of effort, right?
Yeah,
there are some
800,000.
consequences.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I guess, can we share that information with the Board of Finance as well? Like possibly what that number could be in addition to cutting all of our personnel?
Yeah, I think what I'll do, I'll summarize those in a memo to all of you, and we can push that on.
Yeah, that would be a good thing to have, to know.
Yeah. Well, what I remember from the Board of Finance meeting is they were discussing the various stress points of 2, 5, and 10. Someone brought up, what about MBR? And I thought the answer from the Board of Finance at that point was, well, they'll tell us if they can't, what the limits are, or if they can't go to some of these scenarios. So we can't. If we want to send them a model, okay, let's do it. But, just be very clear that this is done on a theoretical kind of basis. This is not something that I feel that they're going to consider as, in order to like pick it. I don't think I would hope that that's not even remotely in the works, that they, for some reason, want to model this.
I think it maybe also just helps them, though, explain this to the public also. If we were to drop this much, this is what our schools are looking at.
Right.
I agree.
Yeah.
I would just add that if we, risking the federal dollar, the federal dollars for IDEA, that IDEA grant funds a large number of staff.
Yeah.
So cutting it, if we were not to receive that, that would be a significant reduction in force.
Yeah. Okay. Are we depressed enough?
Yeah, no doubt.
Yeah. Well, anyway, I certainly appreciate all your work, Kevin and staff. I'll go back to we're all in this together kind of sentiment that we do want to collaborate on, are collaborating with the town. We understand it's not business as usual. It's not finance as usual. It's not budgets as usual. And I think to Glenn's point, bringing us to flat, we have done it in a way that, best protects our class sizes and our staffing and our programs. And to Ruth's point that, we were sitting in a position that was fortunate before COVID, where it looked like, according to mill rate models, that even our normal budget request would have resulted in a flat mill rate. Now that we're reducing our budget request, this could mean a tax reduction. So I think that compared to some other districts that are struggling just to get to a flat tax rate, that perhaps Wilton, at least this year, looks a little bit in a more favorable position. So I'm hoping that the flat school budget, contributes to that, and that we can all come away feeling, the best in a bad situation. All right, so if we look at the rest of the agenda, Lucille, did you see any public comment come in?
No comments came in.
All right, and then we have some future meetings. There will be one Thursday, obviously, and then also a Thursday morning, there's a business ops meeting. Am I right, Kevin?
You're right.
Okay, all right, and then we'll come forward Thursday night, vote on these various budget components, and then we'll move into, you wanted to give us a sort of a skeleton outline of some of the issues we have to consider in terms of reopening.
Yeah, so Chuck put together a list you looked at today. That's, an arm's length of logistics. We'll share that in advance, and then after we dispense with the budget business, we'll kind of talk through what we're thinking about, as well as our approach for planning.
Okay, okay. And then at some point, I know that principals are working on end of year ceremonies. And so we will see sort of maybe some alternative or, some versions and proposals of how to adapt them to this situation.
Yeah, Debbie, you should have a meeting invite for, I think, for tomorrow morning. I asked Bob to schedule some time with you, First Selectwoman Vanderslice, Barry Bogle, he and I, so we can talk through graduation, what some possibilities are or are not, since that's really the major event we need to be thinking about at the moment.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. We need to remember our kids and, to make them as happy and whole as possible and celebrate, because there's still that wonderful accomplishment out there of graduation or moving or soaring ahead. Okay. All right. Any other comments before I adjourn the meeting?
As a mom of an 8th grader,
Oh, yeah.
any discussion about the moving up ceremony for 8th grade? I know that there is some talk about some virtual something, but if that can be discussed at some point as well.
Yeah. Yeah, we have to bring that forward.
So thanks.
Okay, I hear you. All right, well, thank you so much for everybody's hard work, and we'll see you Thursday, and we'll be able to vote on some of these issues. I think we seem to be coming, to consensus around these items. But if you do have other questions, or you think of something that has been forgotten, or, oh my gosh, I should have said this, or something else, please let Kevin and his staff know. And then Thursday, we'll vote on budget items and then move forward into the future planning of end of the year stuff and reopening school scenarios. All right. Okay, this meeting is now adjourned. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks, Emma. All right, bye-bye, everybody.
Thank you, everybody.